I was born in 1475 in Caprese, not far from Arezzo and Chiusi. What intelligence I had I owe to the pure air of that place, with its quarries full of stones and boulders, where the stone cutters and sculptors worked. Thus the hammer and chisels were in my blood. A month after I was born, my father, Ludovico Buonarroti's mandate as Podestar of Caprese expired, and we returned to our family home in Florence.
When Michelangelo arrived in the city, Florence was under the stable rule of a powerful family of bankers, the Medici. For the whole century, first under Cosimo the Elder, and later under his grandson Lorenzo the Magnificent, the family initiated a large number of works of art and undertook diplomatic and economic enterprises that secured the city's political and material power. The deification of the Medici family was solemnly painted by Benozzo Gozzoli in 1459 in the Procession of the Magi. The fresco depicts a meeting of the council that took place in 1439, and in it we can see portraits of the whole family. It depicts the political astuteness and economic power of the head of the family, Cosimo, but at the same time heralds the wealth and refinement that Florence was to enjoy under Lorenzo the Magnificent.
When I was little, I used to love drawing, and not a moment passed when I wasn't scribbling something on a wall or a wooden table. At the age of 13, overcoming my father's misgivings, I entered the workshop of Domenico Ghirlandaio, who at the time was regarded as one of the best artists. My first real challenge as his pupil was painting the frescoes in the choir of Santa Maria Novella, and I have to say, it was thanks to Ghirlandaio that I was introduced to Lorenzo de' Medici.
Domenico, it's 22 years since our poor Donatello left us. If I need a painter, I don't know who to choose, what with so much talent. But sculptors, I mean great sculptors. In all these years, I haven't seen another.
My prince, I have with me as apprentice a young man who truly has something in him. He never tires, and the strength of his hands never runs ahead of that of his mind for a moment, which at his young age is most uncommon.
Young Michelangelo made an immediate impression on Lorenzo. He took him into his home and brought him up with his own two sons, Piero and Giovanni, who was later to become Pope Leo X. Michelangelo frequented the famous gardens of Lorenzo's palace, where he rubbed shoulders with the cream of Florence's artists and philosophers of the time, such as Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola.
In my eyes, the greatest privilege of that place was to be able to admire the sculptures by Maestro Donatello, which used to adorn the garden.
When Michelangelo was about 16, he sculpted this relief of the Madonna of the Steps in yellow marble. Many of its elements are not fully accomplished. One of the Virgin's feet, the gigantic depiction of the child, or the steepness of the steps, whose perspective is exaggerated. Yet the dramatic use of the deep incision shows how he has fully assimilated the example of Donatello. Lorenzo de' Medici died in 1492. Michelangelo was forced to abandon the court due to the aversion shown him by Piero de' Medici, Lorenzo's eldest son. His departure from the Medici household is probably the reason why the Battle of the Centaurs was never finished. Here, however, we see the main theme of Michelangelo's studies, the male nude in motion. The tangle of moving figures, the forceful reconstruction of a famous mythological battle, are perhaps an echo of the wars of that period. When the army of Charles VIII, King of France, marched into Italy, Piero de' Medici opened his gates to the invaders. The people of Florence, however, rejected this imprudent alliance and chased the Medici from the city. Michelangelo, wary of further disturbance, reluctantly repaired to Bologna and then to Venice.
Upon my return to Florence in 1495, I encountered, however, an atmosphere even more hostile to my art. Savonarola the monk had terrorized my fellow citizens with his sermons. He condemned the artistic nude. He assailed the vanity and impropriety of humanist art, invoking the gates of hell to open and devour its creators. 1 year later, I again fled to go to Rome, where Jacopo Galli, a Roman gentleman, asked me to sculpt a Bacchus.
The Bacchus was too sensual, too masculine and feminine at once to escape the fanaticism of the time. The naked Bacchus, however, carries a moral lesson of a Neoplatonist kind. Its inebriation also serves as a reminder that the passions of the body imprison the life of the soul.
One day, a bishop said to me,
"My dear Michelangelo, do you not think that Our Lady is a little too young to have a 33-year-old son?"
To which I replied, "Your Eminence, I beg to differ. It was my intention to show how purity and virginity prolong youth and halt the signs of aging."
The Pietà was a classical subject of Northern European painting, and one that had been tackled by many Italian painters too. But no one had ever created a sculpture before. It was far removed from the various painted approaches of the time. Michelangelo's Pietà marks the birth of a new art form, blending advanced knowledge of human anatomy with great sensitivity in psychological portrayal through the use of expression and posture. Michelangelo returned to Florence in 1501. The political and artistic environment had changed once more. Savonarola the monk had been executed 3 years earlier, and the rule of the Medici had given way to a republic. Michelangelo was commissioned to create a sculpture to stand in front of Palazzo Vecchio. Michelangelo's David is not a calm boy touched by glory, but a young man full of energy and latent strength, with strong limbs and an alert, almost expectant expression. Michelangelo highlighted the centers of thought and action by exaggerating the size of the head and hands. John, he who will later baptize.
In 1506, Pier Soderini commissioned frescoes for 2 opposite walls of the new council chamber in the Palazzo della Signoria. The artists chosen were myself and Leonardo. We worked on them for months on end.
Michelangelo decided to portray a moment when the enemy's soldiers are taken by surprise while relaxing by the river. Meanwhile, Leonardo created one of the most violent battle scenes ever painted. Neither of the artist's frescoes survives today to enable a comparison, except in copies or reproductions of the cartoons. Leonardo da Vinci attempted such a daring preparatory technique that the colors of the fresco began to run. Michelangelo, on the other hand, was summoned to Rome for a grandiose papal commission that was to open a new chapter in his life, as painful as it was seemingly endless.
How would I describe the commission to create the tomb for Julius II? Quite simply as the bane of my life. first part of this long and painful story began like this. When at last, in the Piazza del Popolo, my workmen unloaded the tons of precious marble I had spent 8 months selecting in the Carrara Mountains, well, no representative of the Pope could be found to pay for the order. I paid for it out of my own pocket, convinced that he would reimburse me. But Julius II refused to receive me, and I was shown to the door by the Vatican guards. That was only the beginning.
The papacy of Julius II was afflicted by frequent and costly wars. The Pope decided to complete the Basilica of St Peter rather than his tomb, regarded by many as a political mistake. Back in Florence, Michelangelo, still offended by Julius II's treatment, agreed to a reconciliation, which took place shortly afterwards in Bologna, an indication of their fraught but indissoluble relationship. In 1508, Michelangelo started work again, but instead of the controversial tomb, he prepared to paint the frescoes on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Only a few rooms away, Raphael was working on another great project. By now, the papal court was gathering all the best artists of the time, summoned by Julius II under his protective wing to reaffirm the greatness of the Roman Catholic Church. The meeting of Raphael and Michelangelo in Rome was confirmation of Rome's artistic primacy over Florence. Unlike Raphael, who was assisted by other painters, Michelangelo tackled the task of painting the frescoes in the Sistine Chapel alone.
I was 33 when I entered the chapel. I worked for 4 long years in great pain and with immense physical effort. I had no friends of any description, nor did I want any. But never once did I think of giving up.
Into 3 main areas. The highest, central field, which contains areas of made impatient visits, anxious to see the masterpiece before he died. The work, still unfinished, was revealed to the Pope on August the 15th, 1511. Another year was to pass before the ceiling was completed. Julius II unveiled it on October the 31st, 1512. In December, he fell ill and died in February of the following year, to be succeeded by Pope Leo X.
The dying slave, which I created during that period for the new design of the tomb of Julius II, also expressed my actual condition under Leo X. As Raphael was favored over me, I felt I had become the slave of an endless commission established by Julius II's bequest to pay for the completion of his tomb.
The body of the slave is permeated with an ambiguous eroticism that can be compared with the sensuality of Donatello's David. It also seems to express the obedient, compressed anger that Michelangelo nurtured towards Leo X, the self-same Giovanni de' Medici, son of Lorenzo, with whom he had grown up.
Some time later, I returned to Florence, although against my will. Leo X had freed me from the commitment to building the tomb of Julius II. And since he was the spokesman of God on earth, that was justification enough. Although Julius II had paid for it. In fact, my work on the tomb had stopped only temporarily. So I concentrated on the competition for the new facade of San Lorenzo, a project that was never carried out. Then I was given the task of designing the new sacristy for the same church. I remember that a friend, on seeing my drawing, encouraged me to make the plan different from Brunelleschi's. I replied, it can be made different, but not better.
The effort to incorporate new motifs in Brunelleschi's plan is ennobled by the inclusion of great marble monuments in its walls. The tombs of the father and uncle of Leo X, Lorenzo and Giuliano de' Medici. Lorenzo is pensive, protected by the shade of his helmet. Below him are allegorical figures of dawn and dusk. Giuliano, on the other hand, wearing Roman armor, sits in his niche in a vigilant, expectant posture, reflecting a personality fired by action. Reclining below him are night and day.
Dear to me is sleep, and more dear to be made of stone. As long as injury and shame endure, not to see, not to hear is a great fortune. Therefore wake me not, lower your voice.
Michelangelo's verses express his inner conflict, that mixture of love and hate that permeated his life and his work. Led by events to sing the glories of the Medici, he also opposed their attempt to reconquer the city of Florence, designing fortifications for the defenders of the Republic who were trying to resist.
I ended up fleeing, and then I received a papal pardon, this time from Pope Clement VII, another Medici who had succeeded Leo X. In exchange, I had to paint the Last Judgement. So once again I was released from the commitment to the heirs of Julius II. The completion of the tomb was delayed once more.
From a distance, the Last Judgement looks like a tangle of bodies spreading out, scattered from the center of an explosion. Then, as the eye gradually takes in the mass of figures, one sees Christ, his hand raised in the act of judgment. One then understands how the act of the judge has released a circular motion which leads the souls of the chooser upwards to heaven. The same gesture of God has the power to send the damned plunging down to the right, to Charon's boat that will ferry them across to hell. Everything is there in this final scene: Christ and hell, the heights and the depths, peace and damnation. This cosmos, without perspective or elegance of proportion, forcefully expresses the condition of each character. The damned are heavy and dark. The chosen and the saints still retain some heroic quality, but cannot escape the atmosphere of this drama, in which the final destiny of each is forever determined.
Life was becoming oppressive. I had been working for 5 years up on that scaffolding. After all those years climbing up and down, I realized that my breaths were becoming gradually shorter. I was over 60 by now, and one day I fell. But my hour had not yet come. The moment I'd been working for all my life came when I was 70. At long last, I finished the tomb of Julius II.
The statue of Moses, which is entirely Michelangelo's work, is charged with built-up tension, as if he had calmed down after an outburst of rage. A symbol that is in perfect keeping with the character of Julius II, who, during his papacy, had pursued the idea of the authority and superiority of the Church, as well as its physical and military supremacy. In its final location in the Roman church of San Pietro in Vincoli, it loses all the heroic content of Michelangelo's original design, becoming a limited, almost traditional monument. Only 4 of the monumental sculptures of Michelangelo's original design remain. The 4 slaves who bear the marks of their captivity, bound as they are in the raw marble. With his slaves, Michelangelo discovered and mastered the technique of the unfinished, through which he dramatically expressed his Neoplatonist vision, declaring that a work was finished when it expressed everything that he wanted. During the last years of his life, Michelangelo considered architecture to be increasingly important. He designed 2 identical palaces for Piazza del Campidoglio. He created the flight of steps in front of the Palazzo del Senato and designed the monumental graded ramp. His urban architectural design showed a symmetry that for its time was truly futuristic.
Architecture should follow the same rules as the human figure. The features of one side should be complemented by equal features on the other, like the eyes, which balance each other on either side of the nose. Painting, and above all fresco painting, is no longer an art for an old man like me. Working with a mallet, on the other hand, is the only thing that keeps my body and soul together.
At 84, Michelangelo still had the energy to start the Rondinini Pietà, which turns on itself like a dying flame. Another unfinished work, it is the tremulous yet vibrant culmination of his thoughts. Whereas others tried to imitate them, he seemed able to see the inner energies of man and nature clearly in his mind. Throughout his very last years, Michelangelo dedicated his time to the Basilica of St Peter's, a task which he reluctantly accepted in 1546. He concentrated his energies on the curvature of the dome, trying to achieve the profile necessary to give the impression of it reaching up above everything else in search of God. If there is anything that can compare to this last work, it is the dome of Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence, which Filippo Brunelleschi wanted to be a bid for the skies. This dome Michelangelo had had the opportunity to see throughout his childhood. He copied it and studied it in every detail, despairing of ever achieving what he wanted. Towards the clear Tuscan skies.
I leave my few assets to my family, my body to the earth, and my soul to God.